I listen to that song and I think about how the world is so often full of so much fear, and is really something we all have in common. Listening to an astrologist so looking forward to tomorrow's eclipse, he was reflecting on how it's going to be incredible to watch his children. I think they're going to Wyoming so they could get the best view possible of this great eclipse about, I think it's 1 o'clock, we're going to have this where the earth will darken. And then he said, I thought was profound, but the greatest view I'm going to have tomorrow is watching my children watch the sky. Watching my children watch the sky. And he said, it sure beats them looking down at their cell phones all the time. Then he said something even more profound. Because when so many of us are gathering tomorrow to look up to the sky, we will discover that there's a common diversity around this world. That we're all coming together. Common diversity. Diane Butler Bass's chapter on commons, I thought, what in the world is this going to be about? Commons. This archaic word, as she describes, was used probably more back in the 1810s, 17th century, and she says that, it's a word that became quite derogatory, actually, common. You were commonplace. You were common. I want to reflect a little bit on that. Reverend Bruce from Dublin and I happened to share the same time of sabbatical, and we had great aspirations that, maybe we'd head up to the Bruce Peninsula and hike for 3 or 4 days. So Bruce wisely said to me, he's a good New Brunswicker, and he knows about kind of just planning and good down-to-earth guy. He said, I think we should start small, modest, just like my maritime friends. Just don't go overboard. He says, let's start in Guelph and we'll start walking to Elmira. Let's get to the Kissing Bridge. Let's test the waters. So he actually wanted to park cars and at the other end so we could drive back, but it didn't work out that way. So I said, well, we'll walk there and we'll walk back. And that was probably in July. It was a hot, hot day, flat railroad tracks. And we never stopped talking. The whole walk, left at 9 in the morning. Well, we were wandering back between 2 and 4 o'clock, and I was ready to get me a walker, man. I thought I was in pretty good shape until that last couple hours back. The feet were killing me. Bruce looks at me at the very end. The talking was diminishing, let me tell you. He said, maybe we were a little ambitious. Maybe we should have did bit by bit. And what we found very in common together is we all need to be humbled at times. You know what? You got to build yourself up. And we were like going, I don't know how Gail Ann ever did the El Camino. And we never did get to the Bruce after that, actually. We thought we'll do some other minor walks. Diane Butler Bass is quite beautifully, she discovered what the word common was all about when she went off to college. And there was something called the Commons. It's funny, at Emmanuel College, we had the Commons room. And it's quite beautiful how she describes the Commons is actually just a place of gathering, she says, where you meet all kinds of friends from all over the place, and usually food's a part of that, so there was hospitality. And in her studies, the people that gathered in the Commons decided that they would have a mantra, and I think every church could have this mantra, every community, and she says the mantra became, there's always room for one more. There's always room for one more. What a beautiful image. There's always room for one more. The sadness of Charlottesville, and yet the rising up in America right now, and perhaps around the world, against racism is quite profound. I was listening on the CBC, and an expert in understanding white nationalism, KKK, but he said white nationalism is the real thing of today, the real power. He said, he's been studying it from the 1970s, and what people have to start realizing is that Donald Trump did not cause this. He is the result of white nationalism that's been a part of American history right from the beginning. And it's kind of surprised people, not this writer, because he's been studying it since the 70s. He knew that this was coming. And he says, he, as an active, as a younger man, he's retired now, but as a younger man, he saw the rising in the 60s. And he said, what people have to come to realize is the fear, we're back to that word again, fear of sharing power. You see, white nationalists, he says, are now wearing ties and polo shirts. White nationalists today study at universities. They are business people. They're in everyday parts of America, and they believe in their heart of hearts that they are now suppressed as white people, and that they are so afraid, he claims, of sharing power, of becoming a country that is formed by minorities, and they are afraid of becoming a minority because they don't want to share power. And I thought, wasn't that fascinating? Isn't that something? And he said, the time is now for us who totally disagree with their beliefs to speak up and to stand up, like they did yesterday in Boston. Thousands of people, even as a group claiming to be a group that wanted to have the rights to express whatever you want in America, those who are afraid that what they're trying to express is their bigotry, is their racism, rose up yesterday in Boston. And I'm afraid, I think we're going to see more of this across America because people are afraid. And as this speaker said on the CBC, white nationalists they've been around America for a while. They're not going anywhere. They are gathering even more gatherings across the U.S. And in the same week, to think we would experience as a world the tragedy of terrorism in Barcelona as well. Gayla and I were reflecting before worship. I've had the pleasure to walk that beautiful area of Barcelona where tourists go from all over the world. A wonderful Canadian was killed there. 14 people, so many people injured. And again, driven by people who are afraid that either their religion is not being enabled to be the religion of the world or afraid of losing power. So it's interesting that Barbara Diana Butler Bass, that Diana says she left the church. She left it after 9/11. And even 10 years afterwards, in an anniversary service she went to in the States, she found once again why she left the church was happening all over again in worship, where pastors were praying for 4,000 people, which included U.S. military, but seemed to forget that civilians from Afghanistan and Iraq and civilians from around the world were dying and had suffered. And the reason why she left her church was she's getting tired of the church praying just for Christians, just for one group of people. And as Reverend Galen read for us today, in Acts 2, it's in the last days God declares that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. Doesn't say some. And your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Old men shall dream dreams. And upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my spirit. Peter recites this prophecy. All people. I found this chapter quite profound in her incredible ability to remind us that Commons is a call for us to be hospitable, to seek justice and peace with all people. And perhaps one of the most profound parts of this book, if I can find it, I did, right here, is that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote these words before he died, or was killed. And I think it's profound that this happened in the 60s. And he writes, he wrote the dangers of tribalism, which is the problem of today, like white nationalism. He says, we have inherited a large house, a great world house, says Martin Luther King, in which we have to live together. Black, white, Easterner, Westerner, gentle, Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu, a family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. To live with each other in peace. This is our teachable moment, my friends, as we live in 2017, and some of us are a bit in disbelief that marches like Charlottesville have happened. We're in a little bit of disbelief that the terrorism of ISIS continues, but we are still with hope. And I want to end this message with a little bit of hope. And Ken Chupa has a couple slides to share with you here. And this is a tweet that I think, when I first sent it off to the office, it was the second most famous tweet in history. And now I think it's become number one. But former President Barack Obama, trying to lift up the need for unity, said, no one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin or their background or their religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. These are the words of Nelson Mandela, who, although was imprisoned and suffered so deeply, chose love and forgiveness. And that's one of the most famous tweets now, I think the most in the whole world. I want to conclude with this. When I was heading across the country on my 3-week journey to Western Canada, I remember a very common experience we've all had in our life when you're surprised by grace. And I was just, my daughter was with me and my nephew, so Melissa and Jeffrey, and we had driven all day from, I guess it would have been just outside of Thunder Bay, and we were heading, we weren't going to get to Winnipeg, I knew that. We were camping, right? So we just crossed into the Manitoba border, so you leave in this beautiful Canadian Shield, and I'd seen this before, but watching these kids see this incredible transformation from you leave all the beauty of Kenora and the rocks and the trees of Northern Ontario, and all of a sudden you're into the prairies. It's just like, it's unbelievable. And it's almost a moment for me like I'm back west. And there's something, whether it's the Maritimes you go to, and it's like you're back to the Maritimes, but you're back west. And so we, like a lot of people, we got lost. We were trying to find a campsite we had never been to before, and it was off the Trans-Canada. But we're going down some backcountry roads, and the kids were like tired. The sun's going down, and they're like going like, my nephew's like, Uncle John's got us lost for sure. And are we going to camp anywhere? And we're in the middle of nowhere, and welcome to Western Canada, by the way. So we pull into this amazing campground. It's not coming to me the name of it right now, but anyway, still, it was a very famous campground, probably an hour or so east of Winnipeg. And the woman greets us there, and she looks at me. I don't know, she just looked at us as tired or whatever, and she said, you guys just go find a campsite. And we've been camping before, so we're used to that. And then she said, you see that woman there? And it was one of these people that collect money. She said, she collects money, but you just go find a campsite. And you know what? You're going to be up early in the morning. You're not going to see her in the morning. You just have a nice night. And I looked at Melissa and Jeffrey were like, because they're paying, we went thirds, right? We're paying every night. So they're used to paying, maybe like $30, $40 a night, but they were like saving, and their eyes were open, and I said, welcome to Western hospitality. Now, there was no other tents in the campsite. There was all kinds of RVs and that, but we saw our deer, and we had a wonderful time. But I thought it was just wonderful that the kids' first adventure into the West was somebody that wasn't going to charge us. She just wanted us to have a good time, and we weren't in high season, and it was pretty darn amazing. Number 2 story, I get to Regina. This is coming back. I got to Regina to see a friend there, and I was ready to come home by this time. I had spent enough on the road, and my nephew looks at me and says, we have to go to a Saskatchewan Rough Rider game. If we don't do that, we'll always regret it, because that's like real football in Canada. Yeah. So anyway, lined up. I like football, so it wasn't... Well, a city of Regina that's not much bigger than Guelph. It might be 200,000, but this is the biggest thing. This was a preseason game. When the Saskatchewan Rough Riders play, the whole city shuts down. Now, we got in line to go into this brand new stadium they just built. Beautiful stadium, everyone loved. But I had never seen so many people dressed in crazy green outfits. It was like Halloween for them. They all dress up and they have the biggest time of their life. And again, we found out very quickly in Saskatchewan, they just really come together in common and they have a real fun time together. And it's something particularly those of us closer to Toronto need to remember. In many parts of Canada, coming together for a football game is a really big thing. And we met some wonderful people just in line there. Final story is this, and I'll close. Something we all have in common here today. We all have our fears. But my dear friends in their 80s, they have lived in the West, Regina. They lived in Moose Jaw. They lived in BC, Alberta, in ministry. But the last 40 years of their life, they've lived in Ontario. And I visited them on Vancouver Island in Duncan. And when you're in your 80s, picking up and moving to another part of the country, even though you lived there when you were in your 20s, is a big step. And the only reason that my friends John and Mary Lee had done this is that their daughter had retired out on the island. And they wanted to really settle close to where their daughter was, and their son's in the States. So I looked at them. We have really wonderful memories of him. He was my minister when I was a kid. And I just looked at him and I said, how is it going 1 year into living in a brand new place? And I just loved their honesty. He looked at me and he said, well, John's got a good sense of humor. I'm trying to get used to all the flip-flop hippies out here and the go downtown and everyone's got like a Hawaiian shirt on like they're in California. But he said, to be honest, he said, it's a beautiful part of the world. But when you're at our age, he said, relationships mean a lot. And he said, it's a very tough thing to walk away from. Even though you're with your child, you want to be near, to walk away from your friends. And then his wife said something that we all need to remember, though. And that's what this book, I think, is challenging us. She said, but you know what? We got a neighbor across the road from Hawaii, used to be a chef. He's having us for a pig roast, and we're starting to get to know new neighbors. And almost with tears in her eyes, she spoke about her friends back here in Ontario. But she said, you know what? Wherever you go, there is a way to make new friends, even with your neighbors. And so what Diane Butler Bass was really trying to say in this chapter, and she says it very clearly, black and white, you got to get out of the church. Even though you may love the comfort of your church, you need to get out, like we did on Friday night with the trucks here. I met more neighbors in our neighborhood at the Friday night trucks here on Friday than I've met in 5 years being inside the church. We need to get outside the church and get to know people, not just like ourselves, but people who are new and different, and celebrate that bond of diversity that we might experience at that solar eclipse tomorrow. So God bless you all, and thank you for, I feel, renewed and blessed from a time where I could play, I could relax, and let go of some of the responsibilities. But now I feel good to be back. God bless you all.